This is part 3 of our introductory section. Today we're going to take a look at some of the ways religious traditions interact with the modern world and the challenges that change and the modern world impose upon religions, how the two interact. Specifically, we're going to talk about issues of fundamentalism versus liberal religious responses. We're going to talk about science and religion. We're going to talk about women in religions. We're going to talk about some of the negative aspects of organized religions. And then we're going to have some time to talk about how we can create constructive, respectful dialogues about religion, which is very important and a very important objective in this course. And that's something we're going to come back to again and again, especially in our last week of this course. We're going to come back to this idea of how do we create constructive, respectful dialogues between people of differing ideas and differing traditions. As I mentioned in previous lectures, the world is changing very quickly, and the world has undergone serious social and cultural changes in the last 200 years. And religion, if we believe what the people who follow functionalism believe, the religion exists to function, that it has to be useful to people. Religion has had to change as well and adapt to a lot of new issues that humanity's never had to deal with before. Issues of everything from environmentalism, issues of pollution, issues that capitalism and consumerism impose on our culture, issues of women, of gay rights, of all sorts of different things. And so the two kind of camps of thought are that either religions need to try to protect themselves, protect their core values by not allowing themselves to be changed by outside forces, right? Which is to say that religions should remain faithful to what they are and to what their original principles were. And then there's a liberal response that says, well, things are changing and people are changing and people make up religions, so religions have to change as people change. And to be honest, each side has its points, and most major religions are taking somewhat a more of a middle path, right? Trying to maintain their core principles while still adapting and remaining relevant. And every religion that we're going to cover is wrestling with this issue right now. How do we remain relevant but still stay faithful to what we are and who we are? So there have been a number of very extreme reactions to changes in the modern world, one of which is fundamentalism. You've heard the term fundamentalist before. It often brings to mind very zealous religious people, or sometimes even extremists are called fundamentalists. What a fundamentalist is a fundamentalist usually apply a strict adherence to a selective part of their religious tradition. What that means is that fundamentalists will usually fixate. They'll kind of choose very specific values or principles within their religion to adhere to and say, this is the core of our religion, we can't change from here. For example, one example of fundamentalist and also the other part of fundamentalism, the second part of fundamentalism that's very important is that fundamentalists tend to have a very negative reaction to people outside of their tradition. So it's not just we are this, it's we are this and not that, and whatever is not us is bad. So an example would be the Westboro Baptist Church would be a very good example. Their selective insistence was to, against the military, specifically because of, issues of gay rights, which they felt was sinful and wrong. And so and also, they also were strongly anti-Semitic. They hated Jewish people. I remember when I was at the University of Chicago, the Westboro Baptist Church arrived and protested outside of the Jewish fraternity there. And the Jewish fraternity had a really interesting response. Some of the other fraternities and sororities on campus wanted to join together and protest the Westboro Baptist protesters, to show support for the Jewish fraternity. And the leaders of the Jewish fraternity were just like, that would just be giving them the attention that they want. Better just to ignore them. Just pretend like they're not there. They'll be gone in a few hours. Don't give the media any reason to arrive. Don't give the news any reason to arrive and film them and put them on the news. Just ignore them. Just let them go away. But they are, so the point is the Westboro Baptist Church is a good example of fundamentalists because, again, they have a selective insistence specifically against gay rights, against Jewish people or people of other religions. And they kind of fixate especially on veterans and the army, right? So that's their core thing. And everything else kind of falls by the wayside. And they have a very negative response to people outside of their tradition. That's what fundamentalism is. Another response that is another response to all of these kind of modern issues that are changing in society is a liberal response. When I say liberal, it's a pretty broad term, right? From one extreme to another. But basically what liberalism is it kind of says that we have to accept the changes. We have to be flexible, either by ignoring certain new issues that come up and saying, okay, our religion doesn't say anything about gay rights comes to mind. Our religion doesn't say anything about gay rights, so we're not going to really change. We're not going to say we're against it or for it. We'll let other people decide what they want to do. Or they will take an even more liberal response by incorporating those changes into their religion. Example here, I have this picture here of a Protestant pastor, a Christian pastor. You see there's a rainbow flag behind him, which is a sign of gay rights, and he's wearing a rainbow stole. Right, so his church has taken a hard stance that not only are they not against gay rights, they are very much for it, and they're going to incorporate that into their practice, that stance. On the other side, we have a great example of a fundamentalist protest. Right, you can see this man says, "Obey Jesus or perish." It's very black and white, and that's the other thing that always puts fundamentalists apart, is that they're very black and white. You're in or you're out, you're good or you're bad. So those are kind of the two extremes, and in between fundamentalism and kind of a liberal approach is is a good range of gray area, a good range of in between. Now, people have said recently, religious scholars have said, that fundamentalism is perhaps a little bit too specific, that there are other kinds of, I guess you could say, conservative viewpoints on religion that aren't necessarily fundamentalist. Two of those are absolutist and also orthodox. Absolutism does try to resist contemporary influences and affirm the historical core of their religion, right? Try to stay true to their history. The Amish are a very good example of that. The Amish have tried very hard to avoid contemporary influences of technology, of changing music and culture and clothing and family roles. They still affirm like these very kind of set principles that were put down many years ago. They've avoided change in order to try to protect what they see as the core values of the religion. Another response is orthodoxy, right? Down here we have a picture of a Jewish Orthodox family, and this is in Israel. And you can see around them there are people who are dressed in kind of modern Western wear. This man has a backpack, this woman's in jeans and t-shirt. But they are still dressed, in traditional garb. They have very strict rules about how to structure their family, about gender roles, about rules of kosher, how to eat clean food, not disrupt the purity of their bodies. They're raising their family in a very specific way to uphold those traditions. So it's not just, orthodoxy is not just a point of view, it's kind of a way of life. And the Amish kind of fall into the category of orthodoxy as well. Same thing. They strictly follow all of these established practices, laws, and creeds. And so what all of this comes down to is what really makes up a religion. Is it the original principles and stories that first started the religion? Is there something more to a religion than just laws and rules? Is it the spirit of the religion, a spirit of love or peace? For members members of Orthodox Judaism, orthodoxy, not just Judaism, but Orthodox Judaism kind of gives them a strong sense of identity as well, and a strong sense of purpose. They're not doing this for no reason. They believe very strongly in their religious tradition, and they're trying to uphold it in a world that seems to be allowing all of those things to go by the wayside. So there have been a lot of responses to modern issues. Let's take a look at another modern issue that has affected religion, science and religion. So science, like religion, searches for universal principles to explain reality. And it should be noted that the whole science versus religion debate is kind of a recent thing. Traditionally, before like the 18th century or so, science and religion kind of went hand in hand. The great universities of Europe and of the Middle East and of Asia and in India that helped develop early mathematics, geometry, calculus, early physics, and biology, and all the sciences. These are all religious people. These are all religious scholars. Theology and science went hand in hand. And the reason for that is that people believed in a god or gods who made the world, and people believed that by studying the world, by studying the creation, they could understand the creator better. They believed that there was order in the universe in terms of like laws of gravity and laws of, the way the world is made up, and that order in the universe, that order in nature, reflected an order in the divine, an order in the unseen reality. We'll see this in Taoism as well, Taoism, which is a Chinese religion, this idea that in nature you can see that there's harmony and balance, and that we should reflect that harmony and balance in our human lives, right? So this whole thing that science is necessarily against religion is kind of a new idea, and it came about in about the 18th century, around what we call the Enlightenment, which is a period of time in Europe when science began proving some things that didn't agree with religious doctrine. For example, Galileo was a little bit early, but Galileo believed the Earth went around the sun. Religious authorities said it was the other way around, and there was a debate. In the 19th century, Darwin discovered the theory of evolution, which seemed to go against the Christian Bible and a number of other religious doctrines, right? And this created a debate. So it's about that time when there began this tension between science and religion. But in recent years, the pendulum has kind of started to swing in the other direction again, slowly, very slowly. Scientists have sought to understand religious belief better. There have been a number of scientists who have come out and said that there's no reason why there needs to be tension between religion and science, that there are scientists who are men and women of faith. And then likewise, there have been religious leaders who have come out and said that there's no reason why we should oppose science. It just tells us more about the world. But the book uses the debate between creationism and Darwinism, the theory of evolution, to exemplify the tension between science and religion. You remember very recently, actually, Bill Nye, the science guy, had a debate with a religious figure. I can't remember his name, a Protestant pastor. They had a televised debate about science and religion and creationism versus evolution. I thought the entire thing was I understood what they were doing, but it seems like anytime you take people who have very opposing viewpoints and just let them debate, you know that it's not like they're going to convince each other. It's not like we'll talk about this later. We'll talk about respectful and constructive debate later. Right now, let's talk about specifically the debate between Darwinism and creationism. So there are essentially 4 different ways that science and religion can resolve these conflicts. The first one is to not resolve it. The conflict model says that science and religion are necessarily in contrast to one another, and that there can't be anything other than tension between them. There will always be conflict between science and religion because they'll always be saying 2 different things. The second model says that, science and religion deal with separate realms. There's, kind of the material world that we see, and that religion deals with some sort of unseen reality, and that they're 2 different things, and they might disagree, but it doesn't really matter because they're not trying to say the same things anyway. So that one the second model kind of proposes a stalemate or a truce, right? You do your thing and we'll do our thing, is kind of what it's saying. The third model is that scientists and religious believers can find dialogue in common ground. For example, both religion and science look for universal principles and try to understand the world better. And the last model is similar but different. It says it is integration, which science and religion overlap. An example of an integration model would be the theory of intelligent design, which tries to integrate the theory of evolution with the theory of creation, that God created the world, but God created the world in order to evolve, right? So the 2 come together naturally, and there can be harmony and integration. So I guess part of the question here is that, can religion and science exist separately? Or do they have to either integrate or oppose one another, right? Can they just exist by themselves harmoniously or not? And it should be noted there are a lot of traditions and religious people who don't oppose science. The Dalai Lama, who's a Buddhist leader, said that if science ever proves something that disproves something in religion, in Buddhism specifically, because he's a Buddhist leader, that people should trust science. That we should not be afraid of science, and if it challenges religion, that should not affect your beliefs. It should not affect your religious practice just because science disproves some part of that. Likewise, the Catholic Church has said that evolution is not necessarily in opposition or not necessarily in tension to the teachings of the Church and the story of creation. The Catholic Church has taken a somewhat a neutral stance on it. Different religions have taken these issues differently, right? And we'll see a little bit of that as we study, as we go throughout the semester. Another major change in modern society is that of women and women's rights and feminism. So it's kind of a known fact that most institutionalized religions are traditionally patriarchal, which means they have been ruled by men. Most cultures and societies in the world have been patriarchal. Increasingly, women are demanding an equal voice and demanding equal positions within society, and religion has had to respond to that. Now, in some religions, women have been kept from having positions of leadership, or in some traditions, such as in Hinduism, women are considered perhaps are considered impure in their bodies, and not, I guess, not capable of carrying out certain rituals beyond rituals within the home. Mostly women have been kept within the sphere of the home, and that's where their authority is, and not anywhere outside of that. But that has been widely challenged now. So this, I don't want to say that the struggle of women within religion is the same in every culture, because it isn't. In Protestantism, or in Christianity, the issue of women in Christianity has been whether or not women should be allowed to become pastors and priests. And some denominations of Protestantism do allow women to become pastors and even bishops or even archbishops. Other groups have kept women out of those positions of leadership. So that's the West. In the East, for example, in Hinduism, women in India, where Hinduism exists, women are still fighting for, basic rights to, to defend themselves against domestic abuse, to gain education and be able to, go into the workplace and things like that. So the fight for women in religion in India is very different. It's much more about trying to, establish their dignity and their dignity within society as equals to men, right? First, they have to establish that. And then, other questions of authority and things like that can take place. So again, different religions, this has been taken differently. Feminism within religion has brought up another number of other questions, so another number of other very important questions as well. For example, in many religions, God is portrayed as a man. So is God a man? Can God be a man, or is God a woman? Or can God be a man or a woman? Is God something beyond man or woman? And if God is beyond something, beyond just man or woman, what does that mean about us then? Does it really matter so much our gender or our sex? Another question it raises is patriarchy. The patriarchy that exists within religion, is that necessarily a part of the religion, or was that something that existed before religion, or is patriarchy something that happens outside of religion and then they get imposed upon religion? Do men of power outside of religion say religion needs to be, controlled by men as well, and so we'll change it and make it patriarchal? Or did that patriarchy develop naturally, as it did in many other societies? Another question feminists within religions ask is, do women have the same spiritual potential as men? Right, this has been an argument in Hinduism and Christianity, Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, most major religions. There have been people who have argued that women spiritually are weaker, they do not have the same potential as men do, and so that women need their husbands, they need their fathers, they need male religious figures to help them reach a higher spiritual level, whether that be heaven or a better reincarnation, or breaking or reaching enlightenment and breaking out of the cycle of reincarnation. We'll see in Jainism, there's a question about whether or not women can reach nirvana the way men can, or if they just have to wait to be reincarnated as a man before they can reach nirvana. So the book does a really good job of covering issues of women and religion in every chapter. We don't always have enough time to get into these issues. I think they're very interesting. There'll be opportunities to write papers about them if you find the topic interesting as well. So amidst all of these changes and all these debates, there's been a lot of criticism of religion in recent times. Rightfully so. Organized religions do have a lot of negative aspects. Do have a lot of negative traits. The big one that comes to mind is that organized religions can split rather than unify humanity. There's been a lot of wars over religion, a lot of conflict over religion. And critics argue that as long as religion exists, religious conflict will exist. That's one negative aspect. Another is that sometimes organized religions, devote more energy to preserving their institutions than the institution of religion than its inner spirit, right? Sometimes religions are more interested in perpetuating themselves and keeping itself going than taking care of the people within the religion or the spirit of the religion. In medieval times, one example that comes to mind is that in the medieval times, there was a lot of argument within the Catholic Church about issues of authority. Where did authority lie? And did the Pope, who's the leader of the Catholic Church, did the Pope have more authority as a spiritual leader than the kings of Europe, or did the kings have more authority than the Pope? And so there was a lot of this internal struggle over authority. And amidst all of this, there were a lot of members of the church that felt like the church was ignoring its inner spirit, which was to, follow the precepts of Jesus Christ, which is, to love one another, to take care of the poor, to, be humble and meek of spirit and not proud. And in response, we'll see a number of there was a major response within the Catholic Church. I'm not going to go off on that tangent. We'll talk about it in our issue or in our unit on Christianity, the response to these internal struggles during the Middle Ages. But that's one example, right, where a religious institution starts to take care of itself instead of its people. Religion can create a lot of problems for people individually, psychologically, can lead to an exaggeration of guilt within people who are naturally perfectionist or paranoid within their tendencies, because it sets very high ideals. It can become a form of escapism. Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud both said this, that Karl Marx especially said that, religion distracts people from the real struggle. The real struggle is to, create equality in society here and now, but that religion teaches people that they don't have to create a perfect world because they can wait till the next world. And so it distracted people from what they needed to do in the here and now. Sigmund Freud thought that, religion was just a way of escaping the fears we have of death and things like that. It can become dysfunctional. It can perpetuate itself, as I mentioned. Yes. In addition, because people take religion very seriously and they take religious principles as to be higher, ethical principles than any other part of life, charismatic leaders can manipulate faithful, trusting people, and abuse their religions, abuse their positions of power, and become very corrupt. Adolf Hitler comes to mind. Definitely manipulated a lot of religious precepts. Jim Jones, you might not know Jim Jones in the 70s. He was a cult leader who started a small church that was based on the ideas of equality and, things like that. And then he made a commune, and then, over time the power kind of went to his head, and he became extremely corrupt and kind of crazy. But that can happen, right? Because people trust their leaders. People trust religious leaders. Religion can also become a potential center for political power, right? It may be used as a rallying point for wars against other peoples and nations. Issues of religion and politics are always really thorny. To what extent should your religious principles inform your political principles? And to what extent should you try to take your religious ethics and put them into politics, right? And to what extent should you listen to politicians who claim to be religious? All these sorts of things create really difficult issues. And we'll find that all religions that we're going to study go through these historic cycles of corruption and then reform, right? Like, as I mentioned with the Christian church in the Middle Ages, right? There was a period of corruption which led to a period of reform. And that usually those periods of reform lead to change, and that's how religions change over time, through these cycles of corruption and reform, corruption and reform. And I think that's because that religions need to remain functional and useful within society. If a religion's not useful to people, if it doesn't help them or teach them, if it doesn't say anything to our lives, if you're following a religion that doesn't say anything to your life and your problems, the problems you see around you, then there's no real reason to follow it. There's no reason to teach it to your children. You'll find another religion that does speak to your life and to your problems. So religions need to remain useful to people. And that being said, a lot of people I talk to, when I tell them that I teach religion, they're really anxious to tell me about their religious views. They'll say, "Oh, I have a story for you," which I love. I love, talking to people about religion. I love hearing their stories. But usually people kind of fall into one of two camps. It'll either be religion helped me so much and I think religion is great, or I don't like religion. Religion hasn't done anything for me, or religion has had negative influences on my life and I don't like it. These two polarized schools of thought, which I think is kind of sad. Because I think religion is kind of both. Religion, like any human institution, like anything humans have anything to do with, have both positive and negative traits. But in general, I do believe religions, and this is my personal opinion, I do think religions tend to lean towards more positive because they have to remain useful to people. Otherwise, people wouldn't follow them. They wouldn't be relevant. So that kind of leads us to our topic of discussion today. How to approach other religions, how to talk about religion, how to show respect for other religions. So these rules right here were set forth by a man named Christer Stendahl. He was a Swedish man. He was a theologian, a pastor, a religion professor. He taught at Harvard Divinity School. If I'm not mistaken, he was the dean of Yale Divinity School for a couple of years. He was very well respected in the 20th century. And there's a story that he went to Europe to go to a conference. It was an inter-religion conference. And there are a lot of these inter-religious conferences in the world where leaders of different religions come together and, they all have speeches and they kind of talk about their own religions and they, it's supposed to foster discussion between members of different religions and create understanding and peace and things like that. But Christer Stendahl was really disappointed in this particular conference that he went to. He found that members of religions were kind of only spending time with other members of their own religion, that they weren't really commingling, they weren't taking time to get to know members of other religions, that there were a good number of misconceptions and even stereotypes, different religions that were floating around this conference. And he was really disheartened by it because he felt as a scholar of religion that we should do better. These other scholars of religion and religious leaders should do better. So he came up with 3 rules for approaching and discussing other religions, how to learn about other religions. And they are as follows. When you are trying to understand another religion, you should ask the followers of that religion and not its enemies. Right? Obviously, if you want to get to know a person, you don't find someone that hates that person, ask them what they think. Of course, you're going to get a negative impression of that person. You should go to that person's friends. You should go to followers of that religion, ask them directly. Tell me about your religion. What is it like? And get a first-hand account. Number 2, don't compare your best to their worst. So what this means is that if, for example, you are very good at writing, you consider yourself to be a very good writer, and there's someone else and they're really bad at cooking. They're an awful cook. They can't cook anything. They can't even boil water. You don't say, well, I'm more talented than they are because I'm a really good writer and they're a really bad cook. That's not fair. That's not fair. It's not fair to pick out the worst qualities of someone else and say, well, that makes me better than you. Same thing with religion, right? If one religion is very good at, for example, Christianity is very good at developing charities, especially hospitals and things like that. Hospitals, as an institution, were actually originally a Christian institution for taking in poor people who were sick and couldn't afford doctors, right? So they're very good at that. Muslims are really good at donating money. It's actually written into Muslim law that Muslims need to always donate a certain percentage of their income to the poor. For that reason, Muslim institutions actually donate more money to charities in the world than any other religion. So they're very good at that, right? So you compare those things. You say, okay, Christianity historically is really good at taking care of the sick and the poor. Islam historically is really good at gathering funds and generously donating money to the poor. That's what you do, right? You compare your best to their best, or likewise you compare your worst to their worst, always. Finally, third principle, leave room for holy envy. By this, Stendhal meant that you should be willing to recognize elements in other religions that you admire and wish could in some way be reflected in your own religion or your own religious tradition or faith. For example, trying to think, Confucianism. The basis of Confucianism is that society should be ordered and that we should have, and the way society can be ordered and can be peaceful is if you respect other people. Confucianism all comes down to respect, right? You have to speak respectfully to everyone around you. You have to recognize, to be respectful to your elders. You should never ask for respect yourself, but you should always offer to other people. And I think that's something as an American that I can really appreciate, and I wish that we did more of in this culture, always showing respect for other people. So I think sometimes, kind of in this very individualistic society, we forget that it's not just about asking for respect for yourself. It's not just about demanding respect for yourself. It's about giving respect to other people. So that's an example of holy envy, right? So these are the three principles of respectful constructive dialogue within religion. And I'll bring it back to what I was saying earlier about the Bill Nye debate, as I call it. The problem I see with debates like this, where you have someone who is a scientist versus someone who is a religious fundamentalist, is that when they come to this debate, that they're not going to convince each other. That the people who are watching this on TV have already decided, that either they agree with Bill Nye or they agree with the other guy. His name I can't remember. And their minds are not going to be changed by that. Nothing is gained through debate like that. No understanding or respect is gained through debate like that. And I think far too often, we become very polarized within issues of religion, and it's really important that instead of trying to convince other people of our own points of view, that we should try to learn about other people and their points of view, and come to respect them, even if we don't agree with them. You don't have to agree with other people. Christopher Stendhal wasn't saying that you should learn to agree with a person of another religion and convert to it. It's just saying you need to respect it. And you need to learn about it, which is why I'm a professor of religions. But that being said, I do find this to be really important, and we're going to come back to these rules again and again in this class. And I think it also gives you a clear idea of my expectations for you as a student when you approach different religions, when you encounter different points of view in this class, how to approach it. And how to talk to each other in discussion forums as well. So speaking of discussion forums, part 3 of our introductory week is a discussion about these rules, Christopher Stendhal's rules. First question is, why is it important to establish rules to discussing other people's religions, Why religion specifically? We don't have rules about discussing sports or discussing, music. We have rules to discuss religion. Why do we even need that to begin with? Number 2, would you change these rules at all? Do you think there's something that needs to be added or something that needs to be subtracted from these rules? So give that some thought and answer both those questions. Try to answer both questions with 2 sentences each, so it'd be a total of 4 sentences in your responses. And I look forward to reading the forum. It always makes for an interesting discussion. Okay, so that ends our section on the introduction and religious responses. Next week we're going to start Hinduism. I recommend you follow the readings really carefully, especially in the beginning. You're going to find there are a lot of ideas within Hinduism that you might not be familiar with. So make sure you read the book carefully, read the supplementary readings carefully, email me with questions, and yeah, that's it.